everyone. Hi, yay, everybody. Hi. Thank you so much for coming today. It's the modern world, so I'm not sending you a text. I'm actually looking on my phone for notes because this is the modern world. My name is Mia Park, and I am so excited to welcome you all to tonight's show. This is Vera Marie, and this is Benny. They're going to be up here on stage with our wonderful performers today. Tonight's program is called Let Me Tell You Stories of Asian American Authenticity. I'm really excited to have received the Neighborhood Access Program grant from DCASE. We're into acronyms here. It's the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events for Chicago. So thank you to DCASE. Thank you also. Special thanks to Barbara Levy Kipper, who is also underwriting this event. Without those sources, we wouldn't be able. Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Without help from people like that, we wouldn't be able to support programming like this, which is so important. And another big round of applause. We get a month. It is our month. Asian Pacific Islander American Heritage Month. I think that every day and every month is everybody's day and month, but it's nice to bring a little extra awareness to our presence. And I also want to note that there's a new term, APITA, Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, that's coming in because we want to include our Desi friends. So happy APITA month, one and all. And of course, thank you to Therese and Chicago Public Library for hosting this and sponsoring. And I have to say, I'm in Uptown. This is a neighborhood access program grant. And so I wanted to bring this to Uptown. A lot of the performers are Uptown people. And also, I wanted to do it in the library because I believe in the power of the library. You can call it democratic socialism and work, and sure that is. But the point is, this is our tax dollars at work. This is an open public space for people to come with the intention of learning, with the intention of community, with the intention of having a safe place to come in, to be sheltered, to rest, to check the internet for whatever. So it was really important for me that this performance is actually here in a library, especially this library. So thank you. Okay, so house cleaning. This event is recorded. It's being live over Zoom. Hello, Zoom people. It is being recorded on Zoom, and there's a couple cameras doing that. So if you're here, you are allowing yourself to be filmed. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Also, please put your phones on airplane mode. You're doing it. That is amazing. So when you go see live theater, especially, they say that, but seriously do. Because we don't want to disturb the storytellers. And if you are using a camera, try maybe not to use a flash. That might disturb people too. But thank you for putting them on airplane mode. You're welcome to take pictures. Social media is a great friend here. We are going to have, there are 6 storytellers. Each story is about 10 minutes long. We're going to have 3 storytellers, about a 10 to 15-minute intermission, followed up with 3 other storytellers. We'd also like to give a shout out to Yao, who did all of our tech today. If you want anything done, you talk to Yao Truong. I've known him for a long time. I have to tell the story. So we were in a play once together. He did the lighting, the set design. He was in the play where we actually killed him and ate him. And then he was still like doing lights somehow. So thank you, Yao. That's how amazing Yao is. Okay. So I believe that is it for house cleaning. Oh, yes. Furama, longtime dim sum restaurant here in Uptown, has graciously offered these cute little $5 off coupons, which are back there in the table. We're going to have some group dim sum afterwards. You're all welcome to grab a coupon on the way out and join us for some dim sum, for a little bit more community. So without further ado, we are going to get started with our programming here. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Ada Cheng. Has been such a wonderful. She's brought the art of storytelling to the forefront of so many people's experiences in Chicago, especially within the Asian American community. So thank you, Ada. Appreciate it. I was really honored that she was available, and I was so happy to help her, to sponsor her, to give the storytellers classes, and you all were surprised at how the depth and the breadth of it, right? Yeah, so talk to Dr. Ada Cheng if you want to talk about storytelling or tell your own. And speaking of storytelling, I'm so honored to introduce our first storyteller, Tavory Crouch, she, her, hers, has her MFA in writing and directing from Columbia College. Her most recent short film is called Bitter Melons. You have to watch it. It is beautiful. It was screened at various film festivals, such as the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival and the Asian American International Film Festival in New York City. She's currently making a short documentary about the role of music and storytelling in healing. She's also a refugee from Cambodia. So Tavry also works for D Case in the Chicago Film Office, where she supports independent filmmaking in Chicago. Thank you for that. She's also on the board of the National Cambodian Heritage Museum and Killing Fields Memorial. So let's give it up for Tavry.
Give it up to Mia, our indomitable producer and host. Wow, look at this crowd. Beautiful. So I wanted to talk about female friendships. Female friendships are complicated at any age. I had a childhood friend, and her name was Quinn Tran. I've thought a lot about Quinn lately, especially during the early months of this pandemic. There have been nights where I've stayed up late scouring the internet for her, but I've had no luck finding her because it turns out there are hundreds of thousands of Quinn Trans on Facebook. And why am I searching for her? Well, I've been thinking a lot about my friendships over the years. The ones that have shaped me and marked me. Regrets about things said and not said. Things done and not done. I've been thinking a lot, not just about friends, but about people who I've left behind and others who have left me behind. Quinn is one of those people who I haven't forgotten. We met in 4th grade and rode the bus together as it took us from the inner city to the outskirts of Long Beach, California, where we Southeast Asian kids, brown and black kids, were bused to white schools as part of Long Beach Unified School District's effort to integrate classrooms in a city becoming more minority majority. We would ride a yellow bus each school day and look out the window as the landscape changed from a rundown industrial landscape to the ranch houses and tree-lined streets that surrounded Cubberley Elementary School. Quinn and I, we were friends, yes, but we were also fiercely competitive with each other, whether in class, academically, or on the playground, playing Chinese jump rope. We wanted to be the champion. This was certainly true when it came to the violin. When we reached the following year, one day in 5th grade, we were offered violin lessons. But of course, you had to provide your own violin. I wanted so badly to take violin lessons. I loved the sound of the violin, and I knew Quinn would be taking lessons too. And of course, I wanted to prove that I could play the violin better than her. Quinn and I rode the bus together that day, excited for the violin lessons that were ahead of us. But first, I had to ask my father for a violin. My sweet father, who took me anywhere I asked him to, whether it was the library, where I would spend hours reading and checking out the latest Babysitters Club, or to the craft store to buy felt fabric for my latest diorama project. Except for the time when I asked him to take me to Sesame Street. I begged and begged him to take me to Sesame Street. I think he was at a loss for words and struggled in Khmer to tell me why he couldn't take me to a fictional street that only existed on TV. My father, who was a soldier that took a bullet to his upper arm while fighting the Khmer Rouge, a bullet that was lodged in his back, causing him pain as he worked long nights at the donut shop during the week and weekends when he would dumpster dive for aluminum cans to recycle. My father, Hang Lei Crouch passed away a few years ago from leukemia. Ba would take me anywhere, do anything for me. So sure enough, when I asked for the violin, we hopped in his red Toyota pickup truck and headed to the music store on 2nd Street. I waited in the car as he went inside. I waited in anticipation, imagining him walking out with a black leather case containing a brand new shiny violin. After 20 minutes of waiting, hopefully we didn't need that. No, I'm just gonna pick it up just in case. After 20 minutes of waiting, he came out empty-handed. He opened the car door, sat next to me to tell me he could not afford the violin. I didn't ask questions. I sat quietly as he drove us back home. But a hole opened up inside of me, reminding me that I wouldn't be able to do certain things like other kids. I was utterly disappointed. I was sad. Looking back at it now, I'm still sad that my refugee immigrant parents did the best that they could. I know that Ba didn't want to disappoint me, but I don't think he could justify spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on a musical instrument. My parents didn't see the value in a violin when there were bills to pay, children to clothe, and mouths to feed. But in addition to sadness, I've also felt anger about it because the fact is, like many immigrant parents, they were savers. They had money saved and even loaned out money to relatives in Long Beach to start this or that business. In many instances, they were never paid back, with relatives ripping them off completely. In my anger, I thought, if you could loan hundreds and thousands of dollars to this or that Boo and Ming, why not in a violin? I didn't know many other Cambodian kids who played the violin, save for Nisei Ban, whose parents owned a sweatshop in Signal Hill. I don't remember crying or making a fuss about it because I was a good Cambodian girl. I do remember dreading the next day having to face Quinn. I didn't want to tell her why I couldn't take lessons, but of course she asked, and I mumbled that I couldn't afford the violin. I felt shame in that moment and anger because Quinn didn't offer any comforting words. There was no, it's going to be okay, Tavory. The violin is stupid and people who played are stupid too. She didn't say, it's going to be okay. I'm still your friend, with or without a violin. Nope, no words of comfort. She just went on her way being her bossy, smarty pants self. I decided from then on, I didn't want to be friends with her anymore. I slowly distanced myself from her, chose not to sit next to her on the bus anymore, told my dad not to drive her home after the bus dropped us off. Her little sister, Vicky, tried to broker our friendship, but I stood my ground. I put up a wall of resentment, hurt, and anger that I know I unfairly projected towards Quinn. All of this was cruel of me because I never explained to her why I didn't want to be friends anymore. And one day, Quinn stopped showing up at the bus stop. She stopped showing up at school. Vicky told me as we were waiting for the bus that Quinn moved to Georgia to live with her aunt and uncle. I never saw Quinn again. I then wondered, did she move because of me? Did I hurt her that she would move all the way to Georgia? I may never know the answer to that. I do imagine that she's still playing the violin today, and she has friends maybe that have pulled her up through life's ups and downs. As an adult, I know that life is filled with disappointment, but I've learned that those disappointments won't kill us, that they can make us stronger to weather life's many storms. I hope that we all can cultivate a support system to remind us that the sun does eventually come out, even here in Chicago, that the sun does eventually come out and that we're all going to be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tavory. So this is what fell. Do we need this? Do I need to like drive a point home here? I don't think so. The words are giving us enough point. Thank you, Tavory. You can read more about Tavory on her website, which is tavorycrouch.com. And you can read more about everybody's storytelling souls here from my website, miapark.com, which is serving as the digital program guide for this book. So you can learn more about her there. And do watch Bitter Melons. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. And speaking of films, I'm excited to introduce our next storyteller, Jigger Shaw. He, him, his is the festival director of Chicago South Asian Film Festival. He is passionate about the connection between stories, films, and community. He aims to share perspectives through films and art by providing a platform for talents who are overlooked, and he empowers each of us to see our inner artist. Shah holds several leadership titles. He really does. This guy is like degreed, okay? And isn't it on the advisory board member to several nonprofits. He serves as a jury member in other international film festivals, working in a leadership role in the global healthcare financial firm. He's a technology security leader who holds advanced degrees in engineering, an MBA from University of Chicago, and law from Northwestern University. So you can read more about him on my website, but let's meet him in person. Jigger Shaw.
Thank you, Mia. That was really kind of you. Good evening, everyone. I was 5 years old, and it was a summertime vacation. My mom took me to a cinema hall. It was the first cinema movie experience for me. I still remember the smell of fresh popcorn, spice of Indian samosas, lemonades, and Fantas. We got seated in the cinema hall. The hall went completely dark. A flash of light pierced on the huge silver screen, and it was an action sequence of one of the mega stars, Bollywood, Indian film industry. From that point, my love for film started. I loved connecting different stories, cultures, and experiences through films. Every story brought a new dimension to my life. It is truly said that films can take you to places, and it is a powerful medium to express your message and thoughts. After spending my teens in India, I moved to United States. My love for films grew more, and I started watching Hollywood films. I started to compare Hollywood and Bollywood films. I analyzed India from 10,000 miles apart and started collecting those Eastern perspectives here in the West. The size of the population from the subcontinent, especially India, living in the USA, and their consumption of culture brought a new dynamics to my thinking. Diaspora is always in the state of flux with this whole migration patterns and cultural dynamics. There were a lot of things which I saw as a South Asian and how India and other South Asian countries were perceived here in America. While the current stereotype of Asian Americans is that they are smart, they are competent, and they are super hardworking. Couple years ago, the same Asian Americans were perceived as illiterate, undesirable, and unassimilable. We are still considered marginalized communities. When I first moved to this country, my friend told me that Jigger, you might be considered as FOB, which means fresh off the boat, which is the term which is used by ABCD, American born, confused Desi. And I was like, what? This is a term used for the folks who come from the South Asian descent. One of the incidents I remember was visiting my friend and a family over Thanksgiving holidays. My friend's mom cooked enormous meal. And while we were eating and on the dining table, my friend's brother asked me, "Do you celebrate Thanksgiving in India?" And in my mind, I was thinking, what era is he from? Does he not even know? And then he told me that my mom just showed me the pictures about India, the villages, the illiteracy, and he made the fun of the culture. I felt bad. But before I could react, his mom just stopped him and asked him to apologize. And I said it's not necessary. Then she brought her conflict as a South Asian here. She was born and raised in India, but got married to a husband who was Indian American, and the kids were born here. She mentioned that she was never able to share her experiences to her family as they never understood it. What's equally important to understand is that she cannot make a choice between being an Indian or being an American because the opposition between the two constructs was just false. As a wife, as a mother, she's constantly negotiating this so called traditional as well as this modern aspects of womanhood. She explores the conflict and negotiation about inclusion of Asians in America. The growth and diversification of Asian American in the recent years has nothing but just a phenomena. The diversity of Asian Americans in terms of various languages, cultures, and histories is remarkable. So while I was here, I saw a void in showing the films from South Asia here in America. With my love of films, I joined South Asian Film Festival, and now I'm serving as a festival director. I started curating films which touched delicate subjects, especially from South Asia. I wanted to portray those issues here in America so people can see it. My medium was powerful, but as you all know, when you try to shed lights on not the so called or shy away issues, you are faced with disagreements, challenges, and sometimes shame. As a, as a film critic and a film curator, I remember we curated a film which was an LGBTQ film as a part of this festival, which raised ton of questions from my own community, South Asian community. In South Asia, LGBT is still considered as unnatural, and there's a stigma attached to it. How to think about sexuality within global form and transnational positions when homosexuality has become like a global sign. So while we showed LGBTQ films, I still remember I got calls from the community within South Asia. People told me, "You are portraying South Asians as gays and lesbians. That is not our culture. It is against the religion." These were the remarks made by the most educated and elite class of South Asians who lived for more than 4 decades here in America. So we had to cut down these films. We had to cut down the topics which were sensitive, like politics, homosexuality, religion, casteism, etc. While there is so much that binds the community together, there are also these signs of these common bonds which are being tested as religious cleavages, generational divides, sexual identities, and political agenda leading to fragmentation. Now, fast forwarding to 2019, right before pandemic, we had our 10th anniversary of the film festival, and we held a big LGBTQ and women's empowerment dialogue. I made sure I invited a big star from Bollywood and from Indian film industry who played a major lead in the mainstream web series which was centered around homosexuality. After the festival was over, I still remember it was Monday afternoon, and I received this random call. Hello, is this Jigger Shaw? I said, yes. The voice said, I'm so and so, and I really want to thank you for hosting this LGBTQ panel about the idea of coming out and sharing the experiences of being a gay or a lesbian in a South Asian community. He cried. He said he has been living this dual life all together throughout his life. And then when he heard this dialogue from his fellow South Asians, he thought the weight has lifted out from his shoulders. He was able to come out to his friends, and now he's planning to come out to his own family. I was in tears, and this was the biggest success to me for my festival. At last, I want to leave all of you with one thought in the mind. We are apart, but we are still apart. Do you still feel we have a long way to go in America? Do you still feel that we have to fight constantly for being a mainstream? Thank you.
Thanks, Jigger. That's so great. Is this like cool, right? Hearing all these amazing voices, these people sharing their souls. Our next performer, our next storyteller, Yao Min Trung, who I already gave props to for setting up this amazing technology and everything here, and is a longtime friend. One of the more amazing human beings walking on the planet with us. He, him, his, was born in Vietnam and arrived in the United States in 1982 as a refugee. He studied film at Columbia College, and he has conceptualized, acted in, and directed numerous shows and events in the United States. Ask him about the quails. That's all I'm saying. Just ask Yao about the quails. You will not be disappointed. He is currently the tech director and associate curator at Lynx Hall, another fantastic venue here in Chicago, right? And he focuses on developing the use of tech in performance. So without further ado, let's welcome Yao.
Thank you, Mia. I guess before I start, I just want to say I have two kids, and the third one is coming on his way in May soon. So I'm gonna thank you. I'm gonna put their faces on all your faces so that I can be calm up here. But also, I think this story is also for them as well too. So thank you for listening. This was hard to write. It might be hard for me to fully paint a picture of the full range of emotions happening all at once. It will be hard to connect the full spectrum of the story. A life can't be experienced in 8 to 10 minutes. My dad used a rusted knife to cut my sister's umbilical cord, rusted by the salt of the sea. The flavor of life was seasoned by some harsh circumstances. I was only 3 at the time when we had escaped Vietnam on a small fishing boat, filled with 50 people. There were supposed to be 100. When my mother, my cousin, and myself were pulled on board the boat, the police opened fire, and my dad decided we needed to stop boarding escapees and flee through the South China Sea. Goi siai, goi siai. My mother cried on the other end of the phone call. I am in my 40s, living on the second floor of my parents' building that they had purchased when I was 9. I was living here to take care of my sick father. He had been battling the adrenal gland, cancer of the adrenal gland. My mother just went into the basement to wake my 39-year-old brother to get him ready to work. He was an engineer. He graduated with his a bachelor in engineering. My brother was born in the refugee camp in Galang, Indonesia. We stayed at this camp for 2 years before we were sponsored to come to the US. In Indonesia, my dad cut palm trees to make bedposts to sell to the people. Here, I played with crabs in the sand. My brother was a smoker. He picked up smoking in his early 20s. I smoked a few times with him when I was a smoker. But it's been about 4 years now since I've smoked. We were in our late mid-20s. My brother's 4 years younger, and on a road trip passing through New Mexico, we stopped to watch wild horses galloping through the rocky hills. We both enjoyed the moment together. The heat of the New Mexico landscape were different from the heat of Vietnam. I returned to Vietnam in 1994 with my dad. This was where I saw my dad cried for the first time. My dad dropped to his knees and began to weep. It had been about 12 years since we left Vietnam. No one knew if we would ever be able to return until Bill Clinton reopened relationship with Vietnam in 1994. I had been back to Vietnam at least 6 times since my first visit. My brother never went back. He once told me he was ashamed of the ghetto-ness of our culture. My parents were too busy raising 6 kids in a land that they had no history to. Our first year in the US, my dad got lost for 3 days walking on the streets of Chicago. He didn't speak any English, didn't know the address to the place we stayed. My mother had no way to help him. All she had was worries and 4 kids to take care of at that time. My mother worked at a Thai restaurant in downtown where she learned to cook. Later, she and my dad opened a restaurant. When the one before failed, it led to a new location. On the 3rd try, they stayed in business for over a decade. In the middle of the night, on the day of our escape from Vietnam, my dad was on the fishing boat with other escapees. In the middle of the night, my mom was carrying me and a 7-year-old cousin on a motorcycle to my dad's fishing boat. But on our way through the jungle, near my dad's disguised fishing boat, a child started to cry, alerting the police, who started to fire at the fishing boat. The boat fled. My mother abandoned the mission. They were separated for 2 days. My brother had tattoos that were frowned upon in the culture of our family. I once thought of getting a tattoo, but I never did because my tattoos are always forever changing. He liked to drink and gamble. I have been to the casinos 3 times in my life. My parents worked hard to save money to raise the 6 kids. My mother helped him pay his debts. She also helped me. I know I'm very fortunate to have been given multiple chances. My mother went to the basement where my brother was living, in a condition that only an addict could live in. The smell of smoke had permeated the walls. I didn't know what level of addiction his level of addiction was. I thought maybe it was only weed. But instead of sleeping, she found him kneeling, face planted on his cot. I rushed from the 2nd floor into the basement, where I knew the words I just heard weren't words from a waking dream. I came into the room, and I could see his fingers curled, and his face was blotchy blue. The smell of defecation. I gave a good hit to his back. 4 months earlier, when we had found him gasping between breath on his cot, his fingers were blue. I gave him chest compressions as instructed by the 911 operator. Staying alive was what I remember about how fast I should be pumping his chest. He vomited orange substance. I turned him on his side to let the liquid drain. I continued the chest compression until the paramedic arrived. They already knew from his pimpling eyes that he had OD'd. They injected his nostril and took him away. He was in a coma for 3 days. When he woke up, he started having seizures. He told me that he knew that he had to overcome his addictions. We tried, but resources were over their capacities. He went back to work. This time, there would be no chest compressions. His body was stiff, hard like a freezer burned meat. I called 911 like before. I told him my brother was dead. They stayed on the line with me until the paramedics came. The police arrived first. One went into the bedroom and came out, signaling to the others that there was no need to resuscitate. The moment was so overwhelming that the police officer had to tell me to comfort my own mother. My mother, crying. She was pacing back and forth. She was saying the Buddhist prayer for the dead. Another detective gave his condolence as he proceeded to ask questions. He tried to comfort us and told us that no matter what we tried to do to help my brother, the addiction would always win and that we couldn't blame ourselves. My mind was numb. My body was still. I cried because I saw my mother crying. My sick father came downstairs and saw his lifeless body. My wife came down and saw his lifeless body. The oldest sister came down and saw his lifeless body. The pregnant youngest sister came, and we prevented her from seeing his lifeless. There is a belief that a pregnant person should not look if faced with a death. The smell was still there. The consoling officer stuffed some tissues into his nose as he entered my brother's room. He was looking for his ID, his wallet. I often think about our paper routes, the identification paper and photos the UN gave the refugees. What are our paper routes? Those fragile documents, objects that you still keep to document your own history. When, who will see them? And for how long will they be seen? Thank you.
Thank you, Yao. Making yourself so vulnerable. Thank you to all the storytellers, and thank all of you for having presence. So I hope stories like Yao's and what we've heard so far can inspire everybody, because we have, each of us have such a rich experience of this thing that we're doing. What is this, life? And we have very different experiences doing it. And Yao's, of course, is very unique. Again, thank you for that. But I hope that we're all inspired to realize that all of our own stories are very precious and they all deserve to be heard as well. But we're going to take a 10-minute palate cleanser right now. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I love clapping. So when there was a clapping emoji, I got really excited because I'm like, yay, clapping is one of my mantras in my head. And I love that this is a very clapping crowd. So let's clap because we're into clapping. Okay, I want to give especially a big shout out to Daniela Wheelock, all the way back there. Woo! Daniela is the director of today's fantastic event and has just done so much in Chicago with her directorial magic. And I don't have the notes about you right now. I'm sorry, darling. But she is a biracial queer theater maker. And one of Daniela's passions is directing pieces that give voices to the normally unheard. And her website, again, is Daniela Wheelock, but that is linked to from my website. And she's just amazing. So thank you for being available. She went above and beyond. Yes. To the point where she set up most of these chairs herself. Thank you, Daniela. And another plug for Chicago Public Library. We have Young Park here, who is part of the Asian Pacific Islander committee. And May is our month as a reminder. And so the Chicago Public Library actually has really lovely programming for APIDA for programming. So you can search for that on the Chicago Public Library website. So thanks for coming to support and the programming. Okay, so back to our scheduled storytellers. I'm excited to welcome up Peter Ruger. So Peter, he, him, his, is honored to be part of this amazing event. He was born in Korea and adopted into a family in Oak Park. Peter is proud to be part of the Chicago theater community and has worked with many, many, many different theater companies here. And in fact, I saw Peter in a musical last year, and we're uptown, right? So I would see Peter running. I'm like, there's that actor guy. And then I'd see him running in, so I literally saw you out of my window. I was like, there's that actor guy. And then I went to see him perform. I didn't know he was in that show. And I was like, I have to talk to the actor guy. I wanted to be a part of this. And literally, we ran into each other on the sidewalk like the next week. And I was like, you are destined to be a storyteller here, because I literally see you running around and performing. So without further ado, running up onto the stage, Peter Ruger.
Thanks, Mia. I actually remember that. I was coming home from Jewel and I had bought so many cartons of eggs because they were on sale. And I wanted to be polite, but I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna drop all my eggs. But again, thank you for letting me be a part of this. So there was this picture floating around on social media on April 1st of this April Fool's joke that someone had decided to play on their coworkers. The picture was the welcoming sight of a box of Krispy Kreme donuts. But the joke was, when you opened it, you discovered that it wasn't full of donuts, it was actually full of vegetables. Surprise! The expectation you had looking at the outside doesn't match what was actually on the inside. As an Asian American who's adopted from South Korea, that's kind of what it feels like a lot of the time. People look at you expecting a donut, only to be shocked when you're actually just a bunch of vegetables. I was adopted from South Korea when I was 6 months old. I've been told that my birth mom was in college when she got pregnant with me and knew that her family would disown her and cut her off if they found out. So she spent the summer with a friend, gave birth to me, dropped me off at an adoption agency, and then went back to school with no one being the wiser. And that's all I know about my birth parents, that my birth mother was really committed to education and that she had more sex in college than I did. I don't know anything about my birth father. I don't know if he's Korean. I don't even know if he ever found out about me. But the thing was, I was never one of those adopted people who felt like he had to know more. I watched these TV shows and these movies with main characters who are given up at birth and go on these growing journeys because they feel like a piece of them is missing and they have to find their birth parents. And I watch those and I'm like, oh, that's a cool story, but it's not my story. I've always just been happy being a Ruger, which is my last name for those of you who have forgotten since Mia introduced me a minute ago. No judgment, I'm terrible with names too. But I've been a Ruger since I was a baby, and it's all I've ever known. And my parents are pretty great, and they love me, love the crap out of me, even when I don't deserve it, which in my opinion is what really matters when it comes to family. So why does it matter if the biology is there or not? I also got really lucky, and I grew up in a town trying to redeem itself for the white flight racism of its past by pivoting in the opposite direction and super embracing diversity. So being adopted didn't just make me different, it made me special. And growing up, that's how I felt. My favorite bedtime story that my parents would tell me was of the day that I came home to America with my dad doing the voices of all the families going on the plane and coming off the plane with their little baby girls, and how I was the last baby on the plane and the only boy, which by the way is why I tell everyone is why I turned out gay. And I also got really lucky and I made a group of friends when I was a kid who just liked me for me. They didn't care that I was adopted. They didn't care that I was Asian. I was always just Peter. And that's how I grew up. I was just Peter. But things got a little more complicated with the racial division once I got a little older. When I was 15, I remember going in to interview to become a counselor in training at the Boy Scout camp where I'd gone every summer as a kid. And I remember sitting there in this little room expecting to have a staff member come and interview me. Instead, the head of the whole council comes in. And after asking me a couple questions about why I wanted to be a counselor and about my time at summer camp, he looks at me thoughtfully and asks if I've ever heard of the National Scout Jamboree. I hadn't, so he told me it's this national meeting of scouts from all over the country that happens once every 4 years. and told me that they give out scholarships and asked if I'd like one and if I wanted to go. I thought it was weird. All my friends had interviewed before, and none of them had told me that this was happening. But my scoutmaster said this was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and the scholarship was worth thousands of dollars and just being handed to me. So I should take it. And so I did. What no one told me was that the scholarship was actually a diversity scholarship. And my friends thought it was so hilarious when I found out because, quote, Peter isn't really Asian. And like, the thing is, it was weird. Like, every other scout who got this scholarship had either like earned it or had like lost a family member. And there I was on my diversity scholarship, wondering what diversity I was really bringing. Maybe my friends were right when they said, oh, Peter's really just a banana. He's yellow on the outside, white on the inside. But it's okay. It's not offensive. He's not really Asian. But when it really started affecting my life was when I hopped out of the closet and started looking for my soulmate as a gay man. Fun fact about the gay community that they don't tell you on episodes of Will and Grace, it can be really racist. Like, I remember looking at Grindr and seeing like this hot, chiseled Adonis of a man with his six-pack on display, and his profile would be like, looking for a guy with a great personality, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. Not racist, just a preference. It was really eye-opening, and not just to the fact that the rainbow being the symbol of the gay community is kind of ironic. It was eye-opening to the fact that, like, despite not speaking Korean and not growing up in a Korean household, and despite what all my friends said, suddenly I counted as Asian, and as a way for people to reject me. How awesome. When I think back on my 20s and the years that many gay men spend drinking and dancing their way through the weekend in Boys Town, I have a lot of happy memories. But I also have a lot of memories of the buzz of the alcohol wearing off, the out late, and me on the dance floor wondering why no one wanted to dance with me. My friend Shane, who I'd go out with every week, dazzled men with his blue eyes and his gorgeous blonde hair, and every week he would have a whole throng of men who were vying for his attention and dying to dance with him, and I'd be off to the side, you know, trying to be supportive and not show how disappointed I was that no one wanted to dance with me too. No fats, no femmes, no Asians. Working as an actor is another area of my life that the racial division gets really interesting. In 2016, one of the best theater companies in the city mounted a production of the Tony Award-winning musical In the Heights. But controversially, they cast a non-Puerto Rican man as the lead of the show. This is super controversial because the show is about a Puerto Rican neighborhood in New York, and the racial identity of the characters is super important. It sparked a really interesting debate with half of the people saying that it's really important that theater companies do everything in their power to cast characters appropriately according to race, and that not doing so takes away opportunities from people without as many. The other side was saying, but it's acting. That's the whole point. And what if there aren't actors that fit that? Shouldn't you be allowed to just have people act those roles as the art of acting? Truthfully, I fall more on the side of the former. As an Asian American actor, I can tell you, it's a lot easier to get booked if you're white. But as an Asian American performer who has made his career playing a lot of roles that weren't meant to be played by an Asian American man, it puts me in a kind of funny situation. There were like 3 main shows that get done starring mainly Asian casts. There's The King and I, there's Flower Song, and there's Miss Saigon. But the rub of it is, despite those shows being written by white men, the characters in the show are Asians who either live in Asia or come from families that are Asian, and their cultural identity is really important. So if I don't look like a curly, but I don't identify with the king from The King and I, who am I supposed to play? I guess I don't really have an answer to that question. I just go out and I audition and I add myself to the stories that will have me. And if I really stop and think about it, that's just what I'm doing in life. I'm me, not the expectations that people have for me, and not the boxes that people try and fit me in. Truth be told, I was a little unsure about doing this initially because I wasn't sure if my story would matter, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be Asian enough. But as I've discovered, despite what people say, despite what my friends said growing up, and despite what I think sometimes, I am Asian, and my story's Asian. It's just not the same kind of story that's told by everyone else, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being a box of donuts that's full of vegetables. It's just important that people don't look at you as an April Fool's joke.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. Sorry that you were holding all those eggs. I didn't know. Maybe there were really boxes of donuts. Maybe there were vegetables in those cartons of eggs. So I am of Korean descent. My mother was born in North Korea, escaped right before the war. My father was born as a second-class citizen in Japan, survived the atomic bomb, and they both were refugees to South Korea, and then both survived the Korean War. Lots and lots of stories there individually, and then being born and raised in America to this lineage, this intergenerational depth of trauma on both sides of the family is something very real that a lot of people experience. But because I am Korean, I identify with Peter's experience and I identify with our next speaker's experience as well. So Minky Kim, they, them, theirs, is a queer, non-binary, transmasculine Korean personal trainer in Chicago. They founded Han Training right here in Uptown, on the edge of Uptown, Irving Park and Sheridan. And after they founded Han Training, after recognizing the lack of inclusive and accessible fitness trainers and spaces that align with the progressive and radical dismantling of white supremacy, queer transphobia, fat phobia, ableism, and classism. And so I know. The way I found Han is that I was driving past Han to, go to my Tai Chi class, right? And who happens to be taught by a white guy, but it's a good class. But anyway, I was driving to Tai Chi class and I saw Han in Korean. And the first thing I thought was, that effing better be by a Korean person, because if it's not, I'm going to kick their ass. Han is this very special term that we had a little discussion, is now identified as something that is really characteristic of Korean people. They say it's hard to explain, it kind of is. It's supposed to talk about this kind of innate sadness, this longing. I would call it intergenerational trauma, but it's very appropriate that Minky named their center Han Training, specifically for those reasons that I talked about, but also, again, just happening to be Korean people. It's a deeper path for me, appreciating that. So if all of you are interested in having a safe, really interesting place to get some group exercise, Han Training, and let's welcome Minky Kim.
I feel like that was quite the introduction. I'm done now, so I'm gonna go. No, I was kidding. Thank you, Mia. So a few months ago, I was walking to work when I saw an elderly Asian woman walking down the street towards me, focused on her path, quietly going about her business. I observed her pace and waited on the other side of a bus stop to give her a wide enough berth to pass through the space between the building and the partition. It's not a narrow sidewalk, and we both definitely could have walked through with room, but I waited anyway. As she passed by, I bowed and caught her eye as she nodded her head at me and carried on. I deeply resisted the urge to turn and watch her. Lately, it's been hard not to feel hypervigilant. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen the headlines, posts, and videos of increasing attacks on Asian people across the globe, many of them elderly and particularly violent in the US. It drives me nuts because I see Asian elders walking alone all the time. Harmony, what are you doing? Why are you alone? And that's the voice that screams ahead. And they don't physically remind me of my grandmother, but I think of her anyway. She was lively and radiant, cheerful and warm. Being the first grandchild, she made no point to hide the fact that I was her favorite. So, I adored her right back. The days leading up to her big visit from Korea were full of excitement. And at the first sight of me off the plane, she would grab my face and pinch my cheeks and beam really, really widely. Later on, I learned that she was a child refugee from the North during the active years of the Korean War. I say active, even now there's been no official treaty ending it. She crossed with her father, but when he went back for her mother, it was too late. The border was closed and they never saw her again. Maybe it was grief, or maybe he was heartless, but her father subsequently abandoned her to start a new family. She worked, studied, married, had children, and when her husband fell ill, she tailored garments and handbags to single-handedly support her family. This is all I know about her life before me. And when I think of how I remember her, it seems unreal that someone who has suffered so much violence and neglect was capable of the love that she showed me. So it didn't take very long for me to notice that my mother seemed a little more on edge during these visits. As a kid, I viewed my mother as the opposite of my grandmother. Cold, withdrawn, austere. She was dutiful and polite, but unaffectionate. Made certain that my basic needs were met, but struck me hard and often when I didn't meet the expectations that were never explained to me. My mother rarely ever talks about her past, but I know that it wasn't full of kindness. My grandfather was known to be extremely strict, unforgiving, and corporal. And I'm pretty sure my grandmother was either not there or wasn't inclined to step in. What I do know for certain is that my mother wanted more than the life she was in and wasn't given the opportunity. She wanted to study piano and the arts, but was made to study law. She wanted autonomy, but even through adulthood, she was humiliated and beaten for any missteps. She wanted to travel and see the way others lived, study and create a life of her own. So much so that she sacrificed independence to see the world by marrying my father and having a family. Once in the middle of a big fight, she spat bitterly, "I didn't even want you." I don't think that was a lie. I was just another responsibility she was bound to. Another reason she couldn't do what it was that she wanted, and another source of anxiety and uncertainty. Not only that, but I was also another being, one that made choices and decisions, mistakes that she couldn't fully control. And after 3 decades of oppression and repression, she found herself in the role of authority. And in hindsight, I understand why all that rage fell onto me and my body. At school, here in the States, I was mocked for my name, being Asian, for being small and young and anxious. The church was no better, and my desperate bids for connection made me very easy to humiliate. And home was a bit of a thorny rose. It was a place of isolated safety from the world, but full of physical and psychological violence. But the demon you know, right? Over time, I learned to adapt to every situation quickly to avoid discomfort or pain, justifying any questionable choices I've made to do so. I've become so good at being unfazed by pain that I struggle often to access these feelings. One thing that never really went away was the rage. You see, over time, I started having these moments of inconceivable rage. It fills me with extreme pressure and discomfort, and my heart pounds, my vision blurs, and all I want to do is destroy everything around me. And I want everything to burn. My anxiety and judgment are the only things that can overrule it. Can't break anything, you can't afford it. You can't go outside, people will see. You can't scream, people will hear. Over and over, beating down the anger before shoving it back into its compartment. So one day in high school, I decided to try and resolve this discomfort. My parents and I had fought right before they left the house, and I could feel the anger just building. I grabbed computer paper and started ripping it. I threw all my crumpled, tear-covered, snot-covered tissues in any direction. I punched the couch cushions and threw those across the room like a shot putter. I think I screamed into one. And I slammed open a few kitchen cabinets for good measure. And I stormed around in the dark like this for about 10 minutes before I went back to my room. It didn't help. I think I knew it wouldn't, but I had hoped it would alleviate something, but I was still angry, still full of rage, and still so sad. I swiped a pencil from my desk and slammed it down as hard as I could, and it snapped. A tiny but deep mark marred the face of the desk, and I paused. I had finally marked something outside of myself, finally visible, even if it might be easy to miss. I felt a little bit of relief and a little bit of shame. The symptoms of generational trauma include hypervigilance, a sense of a shortened future, mistrust, aloofness, high anxiety, depression, panic attacks, nightmares, insomnia, a sensitive fight or flight response, issues with self-esteem and self-confidence. I think of the trauma of war and loss of family that my grandmother experienced, the pressure of duty and success that put on my mother, and the heat of that pressure seeping through the cracks to burn me, all without ever saying a word to each other. I grieve the fact that we never talked about it, and that my grandmother and my mother never knew childhood and navigated quietly to survive and never shared their experiences with anyone, carrying the burden as though they must. I see the same thing happening now. The silence of not only our elders, but the ignorance and dismissal of the communities that surround us, communities that I serve and intersect with. For those of you wondering about the house, I cleaned it all up before my parents came home. No one ever saw it but me. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm really tired of pretending like it isn't happening or a real concern. Like I don't worry about my parents every day or keep a steel pipe in my car just in case. Like I don't feel the weight of silence from the world around me. When I told the simple fact of bowing to an elder as she walked by, I was asked why it was a story I wanted to tell. With this simple act of bowing, I'm desperately trying to communicate the only way I've known how. Because behind my bow is a generations-long cycle of silence, grief, and rage that I no longer want to carry alone. Thank you.
You're not carrying that alone. We got you. We got each other. All right. 수고했어. We're at our last storyteller, and I'm really excited about announcing her. I've been a fan of Hannah's works and plays that she's written and also directed, and just been a force in storytelling. Quick story. So she wrote, was it the second or third of the trilogy? One, not one, but two. The first. So she wrote a trilogy of plays from Hawaii, and she set it on kind of on the beach. It was like a patch of grass outside of a park, and you could see Lake Michigan. And this play's about Hawaii. And for some weird, like psychedelic moment, you actually thought you were in Hawaii, and like the rocks were part of the set design. It was brilliant. It was so great. Just one of Hannah's amazing works. So our last storyteller tonight is Hannah Ii-Epstein. She, her, hers. She was born and raised on the north side of Oahu. Can I do this? Is that okay? Is that okay? She is a creative writer, dramatist, and artistic director of Nothing Without a Company, a theater company. And without further ado,
It's February 2016 in Chicago, North Side, East Lakeview. I am covered from head to toe and have dreads tucked in my black jacket with the hood up. It's windy. I left the apartment to pick up some groceries and am heading back with a filled reusable grocery bag in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other. Police sirens. Red and blue lights flash against the brick wall. A cop car pulls up next to me. I stop walking. A white male police officer gets out of the car. He looks me up and down. "Sorry we stopped you," the cop says. "I thought you were a colored girl smoking a joint." I don't say anything. He gets back into the car and leaves, and I am stunned, shocked, and speechless. I knew what racism was before I moved to Chicago when I was 21. Conceptually, that is, I believed I understood it in theory, not fully grasping or accepting the concept firsthand. In Hawaii, race relations are different than the lower 48, the continent. In Hawaii, people are seen for their multiple ethnicities and cultures. In Hawaii, I am Hawaiian, Chinese, and Caucasian. In the lower 48, I am a chameleon, grouped together with acronyms and assumed identity. People presume I am connected to their personal identity, and though I am in a lot of ways honored to be a person that other people reflect themselves on, I cannot dream of accepting lineage where I have none. And it's because of this, I feel more Hawaiian in the continent than I did growing in Hawaii. That my Hawaiianness is connected to an active thought process, that I must continue to perpetuate my culture now that it doesn't surround me like the Pacific Ocean surrounds the islands. It is 2014. I'm smoking weed and having a conversation about race with a few friends, all Black women. I mentioned that I'm not Black as far as I know. One of my friends says, "Doesn't matter, you're Black in my eyes." Another friend says, "You gotta have some Black in you." The third friend says, "You're Hawaiian, right? That's the Black of the Pacific." I don't know how to respond. I take a breath, I take a hit off the joint, and I hold it in for a moment to gather my thoughts. Hawaiians and Black folks have a lot in common, I say. Polynesians were essentially kidnapped and sent to other places in the Pacific or Australia to work sugar plantations. Though technically they were indentured servants, but they were treated in ways comparable to slaves. In order to assert with aloha, my personal blood makeup, I tend to lean toward the commonality within the races of people of color. It is a way for me to say, though I am not you, I am you, and you, and you. It is and relate. Because we are all under a giant BIPOC umbrella as a different way to say not fully white. API, AAPI, APIA, APITA, AANHPI, AAPCAO, Anapeasy. Ooh, I did not hear this language growing up in Hawaii. I had the Filipino neighbors, the Japanese neighbors, the Micronesian neighbors, the Samoan neighbors. I did not have AAPI neighbors. People were who they were and not grouped together in a way where it feels like we are all from the same physical place on this earth. Each culture and practices should be as original as they are. Chinese people and Korean people are different. They have different methods when it comes to language, food, artistic practices, and more. So why are we all lumped into one category of the Asian American? Is it the commonality of a physical space? Aren't people from the United States and Canada really just North Americans? Why not call them NA? Who came up with these concepts? Things like this has always confused me. And the more I explore it, the more questions I have. It's 2018, and I have just graduated from Northwestern University with my master's in writing for the screen and stage. My parents had flown in from Hawaii to celebrate this achievement. My mom had made many lei for me, as it is in our cultural practice to present lei for a special occasion. In all of the graduates of 2018, I am the only one with lei. From my chest to my mouth, I am filled and adorned with the aloha spirit from Hawaii, and yet I feel alone. I'd asked my mom to make 11 extra lei for my cohort. I lei each of them, and though it is not in their cultural practice, they accept, and I no longer feel alone. My existence as Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian, seems to be my main cultural identity. Perhaps it's because I was raised in Hawaii. Perhaps it's because though I am culturally Jewish, I am not religiously Jewish. Perhaps it's because I don't know my particular Chinese lineage other than my mom's mom was Chinese Hawaiian. Perhaps it's because the representation of Polynesians in the lower 48 is needed more than the Asian ancestry I have no knowledge of. I've been wanting to take that DNA test, the one that tells you what your blood makeup is, what regions on Earth your ancestors are most likely from. I've been wanting this for a few years now, but I haven't been able to bring myself to actually do it. I think I'm scared that the government is going to use my DNA for some terrible secret project, or I will be cloned somehow. Or my information sold to the highest bidder like I'm somebody. But with the trauma my people have gone through over the hundreds of years by colonizers, it's no wonder that I do not trust the words of legally binding documents. It is February 2022 in Chicago, Argyle Street, east of the Red Line. I'm walking home from the grocery store with a reusable bag in my left hand filled with taro root, bok choy, fish cake, and other goodies. I no longer have dreads, but my hair is tucked into my hood because it's windy and cold. A cop car pulls up next to me. No lights this time. I stop and take my right hand out of my pocket. I'm not wearing gloves. A brown male police officer gets out of the car. He looks me up and down. Hey, he starts. You're with the Aloha Center Chicago group, right? Yeah? I answer in almost a question, not fully sure where this is going. I saw you at the Lunar New Year parade. My daughter wanted me to tell you guys aloha. She's 5. Moana is her favorite movie. Tell her aloha from all of us, I say. Sorry for stopping you. I just saw you and remembered. Oh, no problem. Have a good day. You too. Stay safe out here, he says before getting back into his car. I had moved to Little Vietnam, Asia, more than 5 years ago. I tell people it's the closest I can get to Hawaii in Chicago, that I understand the food in the markets, that I don't get as misidentified when walking around my neighborhood. All of my identities shape who I am, and I am proud to be a Hawaiian, Chinese, Jewish, queer artist, activist. I am proud to know that I am learning every day, that everyone's stories, experiences, and identities bring us closer to each other. Pupukahi I holomua, unite to move forward. By working together, we progress. Aloha.
Aloha. Oh my gosh, this is the end of our performance. Can we have Daniela and Ada and Vera Marie? Come on up. And the storytellers, everybody. Just so that everybody can kind of see who participated. Maybe come on up here. I know this will be our final bell. We'll do it anyway. We'll do our final bell. And some of us can kind of get down here or whatever. Anyway, this is us. Kina, what other acronym? This inspires everybody to honor their own stories because we all have such valuable ones. Thank you for holding space for us. And